Hi. Good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you may be in the world. Welcome and welcome back. If you are coming back, hi. And if you don't know who I am, hi. My name is Brooke and I go by Brooke's Moon, and welcome to my channel. If you have been following me for a while, you know that I was doing Minecraft content back in 2021, 22. That is not a thing anymore. I'm not going to be posting Minecraft content anymore. I'm going to be gearing my focus more towards like books and film because I got a degree in film and reading books is like my favorite thing to do right now. If you are sticking with me after the change, hi. And if you're just seeing this for the first time, also hi, welcome in. I'm so glad you stopped by and clicked on this video. Today we are going to be looking at all of the books that I read in 2023, which wasn't that many in comparison to other people that are on BookTube and BookTok, but I didn't really start getting back into reading until after I graduated college. I set a goal at the beginning of the year to read more, and I set a goal for 15 books for the entirety of 2023. I did manage to surpass that goal, and I hit 25 books, which is insane considering that I thought that 15 was going to be too many, and then I did 10 more than that. But I didn't read much during school because I was working so hard during my senior year. I did go to film school, so I was working on my final project, so a lot of my time was spent working on my project, and if I wasn't working on my project, I was working on my friends and helping them out. Reading was kind of like the thing that was at the back of my mind. I read only 2 books from the months of January to June because I was so busy with school. After I graduated college in June, I went from reading 2 books to 25. I read 23 books in 6 months, so really I didn't spend a whole year reading 25 books. If I did, it probably would have been a lot more if I was reading every month. I set a goal to get through my physical TBR as well. As you can see behind me, I have a really big bookshelf. I have a lot of books, and I want to get through my physical TBR before I bought more books. That ban didn't last for the entirety of the year because by the end of December I had gained 50 new books, which was how many I had left of my physical TBR, so I kind of doubled it before the year was over. So I'm still trying to get through my physical TBR. I have a lot of books that I haven't read. Some of them have been sitting on my shelf since I was in middle school. I think all of these books that I read except for 4 were ones that I already had purchased, and the last 4 of the year were ones that I purchased and then read, so I would say that the book ban was pretty effective. So let's get into the first book that I read in 2023. The first book that I read was Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. I was recommended this book by a friend. I did buy it on a whim when I was in Barnes & Noble, and then she mentioned it to me and I was like, oh my god, I think I have a copy of that, so I'm going to read it. I genuinely did enjoy this book. It did lull a little bit for me in the middle. There were just parts that felt kind of slow and I had to push myself through them to finish it. But I'm glad that I did because the second half of this book is just so wild and so much happens in such a short period of time. The story of these 3 sisters realizing they're witches and that they have to like overcome this big bad was just, I ate it up. It was amazing. The fact that they also had a himbo helping them to defeat the big bad was just like icing on the cake. The sisterly love in this book healed something in my soul and also then crushed it into a million pieces when I got to the end. No spoilers because I want everyone to read this book because it's so good and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Giving it a 4.5 out of 5 because I had to like push myself through those little lull bits. The next book that I read I don't have a physical copy of because I borrowed it from one of my roommate at the time. That I read was Daisy Jones and the Six. For some reason, this book took me 4 months to read. It's not very long. This was the first book I've ever read by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and I have heard good things about her writing. I did find the formatting of this book very interesting, just because I've never read anything like it before. It was a little confusing for me at first, just because there were so many characters, and I was just losing track of who was who and what was happening at first. It's a me problem, not a book problem. Overall, I liked how it was laid out. I liked the story. I thought it was really interesting. I love a good period piece that's set in the 70s, so I thoroughly enjoyed reading this. I, however, did not like most of the characters in this book. I did not like Daisy and I didn't like Billy, but I don't think you're supposed to. I thought they were both pretty terrible people, and that I couldn't really justify their actions on either end of their part. I ended up, like, reevaluating my rating on this because I originally gave it a 4, but I then changed it down to a 3.5. I still really enjoyed the book. I had a good time reading it. I think me taking so long to read it also is the reason why I didn't enjoy it as much. If I read it in a shorter period of time, I think I would have been more invested. I have a few others of Taylor Jenkins Reid's books. I do like her writing. I like how she writes, so I'm excited to read through some of her other books. Aw, Stella made a feature. The baby man. Hi! Don't mind him. The next books that I read was the Folk of Air Trilogy. I read these right after I finished school, and I read them in a week, which is the fastest I've read through a book series in a while. The last time I devoured a series like this was when I read Percy Jackson for the first time, and I read all 5 of them in 2 weeks because I just couldn't get enough of them, and I kept reading. This series did that for me again. I cannot explain how much I think about these books. They might be my Roman Empire, as annoying as that trend is. I do think about them at least once a week. I brought the first book with me when I went on vacation with my family. I brought book 1 and 2, and then we were stuck at the airport because our flight kept getting delayed. I finished this book in the airport, and then I immediately started reading the second one and got 2/3 of the way through because this is all I read on my flight and also in the airport and during our layover. I devoured these books, and I recommend these books to so many people. I recommended, I think, this series to 4 people that I know in my life because they have not read them before, and I know this is not anything new. These books have been talked about to death on Book Talk. I'm not going to give spoilers in case I'm not the last person to read these books, but if you have not read them, I highly recommend them. They are so good. I gave The Cruel Prince 4.5 out of 5. The Wicked King got 5 stars, and The Queen of Nothing also got 5 stars. Overall, I rated this trilogy 5 stars. These books grabbed me by the neck and ripped me out of my reading slump against my will, and then after that, I devoured every single book that I had on my TBR listed out from the beginning of the year. I'm just so mad I didn't read these books earlier because I've had them for so long. I think I got them for Christmas like maybe 2 years ago, and I did not read them until this past year, and I regret not reading them sooner because if I knew that this is what would have happened if I picked up these books, I would have picked them up a long time ago and been out of my reading slump. Immediately following that, I read Circe by Madeline Miller. I don't know why, but during the summer, I like reading mythology-based books. I read Song of Achilles by her in 2022 during the summer, and I loved it so much. I read it twice. I fell in love with her style of writing during Song of Achilles. I think the way that she describes things is just so eloquent. I went into this book not knowing anything about the story of Circe. I remember her being mentioned in the Odyssey when I had to read it as a freshman in high school, but that was 8 years ago. It wasn't until after I finished the book that I actually looked into what the actual Greek mythology story of Circe is, and I personally, maybe it's just because it's written so well, I prefer Madeline Miller's adaptations of Greek mythology stories. I think she does a beautiful job of retelling them, and she does add her own little flair, but she really picks apart these characters, and you got to know Circe from top to bottom. I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5. Like I said, I love reading mythology during the summer, so I continued that by reading the Kane Chronicles by Uncle Rick. Really fell in love with Rick's writing and remembered why I loved Percy Jackson so much, and it's because of how he writes his books. He is one of the very few male authors that I actually enjoy reading. I have had these for longer than I can remember. I don't remember when I got them. I do remember I was very young and it was before high school. I think I got these when I was still in middle school. I never read them, so I decided I was going to read them this year because I wanted to give them a chance. They are Egyptian mythology. The way that Rick wrote these books is very obvious that he knew that anyone who picked them up would not know anything about Egyptian mythology. Everything that was explained about Egyptian mythology did not take away from the plot of these books. That's what I love about Rick's writing so much, is because sometimes his characters don't know anything either, so you're learning with them. And in this case, Carter knew some things, but Sadie didn't really know much, and so you're learning with them about who these gods are, what items in Egyptian mythology are important and what they mean. I also really love the sibling duo dynamic that is happening in these books, because I know if I had to save the world with my sister and it relied on the two of us, that we would bicker the way that Sadie and Carter bickered in these books. This series hit the nostalgia spot that I absolutely needed over the summer and kept me from rereading Percy Jackson for the third time, which I'm probably going to do this year again anyway because of the show. I gave each of these books 4 stars individually, so overall just math, which I'm not normally good at, but that means that the trilogy itself also got a 4 stars. This next one I usually wouldn't count, but you're going to see why I'm counting it. This is It by Stephen King. It is a brick. When I read It for the first time, it took me over a year to read this entire book. This is All the Young Dudes, a Marauders fanfiction written back in 2018. This I read in 2 weeks. As you can tell, this is a lot more than this by a lot. That is the reason why I'm counting these. Also, I bound these by myself. I learned how to bind books, and I bound All the Young Dudes. I usually don't count fics in, towards reading goals, just because it's something that, I don't know, it doesn't feel real to me because I'm scrolling on my phone and not actually, with a physical book in hand. But because this book is longer than the longest book I have ever read, physically, a physical book I have ever read, I counted it, okay? It was over 500,000 words, and the fact that I read it in 2 weeks scares me. Just a little bit. I'm going to be making a totally separate video breaking down this fic because it deserves a bunch of attention and I'm hyper fixated on the Marauders, if you couldn't tell. Obviously, the fic got 5 stars for me. It is probably one of the best pieces of literature I've ever written, and it is a fanfiction about dead gay wizards from the 70s that are mentioned barely in Harry Potter, and all of the things you know about them are just a shared delusion with people on the internet. Read it. It's really good. So the next 6 books that I read is a series, and I set a goal specifically to read through this series by the end of the year, and that is Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. This book was actually a reread for me because I did read this book the first time back when the movie came out, I think, which was in 2016? Don't quote me on that. I never finished the rest of the books in the series, even though I had them, just because I didn't have any desire to at the time, but I did want to read this entire series in 2023, just so I could say I read it, and I didn't have to keep looking at them and be like, I wonder what happens in these books. The first book, when I read it the first time, and I did like it when I reread it again, the series starts off pretty strong. If you don't know the premise of Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, every child has a peculiarity. I cannot say that word at all. It basically follows the classic hero's journey with more whimsical elements and unique characters, which is why I really liked it the first time that I read it. And then as we went through the series, it kind of dwindled. The first book, 4 out of 5 stars. It was very nostalgic to read through again, and I do enjoy this book a lot. I really like the first book. I think it's fun. It's very quirky. The next book in the series is Hollow City. This is when we start learning more about the peculiar world and what exists outside of Miss Peregrine's loop, which is where we're first introduced to peculiar children and the fact that there's a whole nother world that exists that Jacob is part of but knows nothing about. That because he learns that his grandpa was also part of that world. I like this book a lot because I liked learning about the world and more about it, but Ransom Riggs does this thing in these books that make them pretty unique. He found a bunch of these photographs and wrote these books based off of the pictures that he found, which is very interesting and a very unique way to write a book and come up with a plot and a story. However, there are moments in this book specifically that he does do throughout the rest of the series where he will bring up minor characters and give these details of all these small characters that do not come up again because it was a very fun picture. Unfortunately, those pictures and stuff just become forgettable details that are thrown in. He does kind of ramble sometimes about these characters and who they are, and they don't matter in the end. I don't like when authors do that because it just feels like a waste of time. There are parts where characters play an important crucial role in that part of the book, but they don't come up later and at all. There's nothing wrong with minor characters, but I do wish that the minor characters existed for more than just 5 to 6 pages. While there were moments of this book that I didn't like, which was Jacob and Emma's relationship, I gave this one 3.5 out of 5 stars, just because I really liked learning about the peculiar world outside of the loop. I thought he planned out things very well. Everything connects. Like, there's never, like, a missing moment. It just, like, sometimes he includes too much and it becomes distracting for me. The next book was Library of Souls. This is the third book in this series. In book 2, you start learning more about Jacob's character and his connection to the peculiar world, but it isn't until this one that you really get to know about it. I really liked how Jacob evolved in this book. This is where the series was supposed to end, and you can kind of tell that that is where Ransom Riggs was planning on ending it because of how this book ends. It does kind of give you some room for another one, but if it ended here, I think it would have been fine. Because it ended in such a well-rounded way that I didn't see it necessary to continue the series. The character arcs kind of concluded. I ended up giving this one a 4 out of 5 because I just really liked how he wrapped everything up. And I really wish the series ended here. But alas, it did not. Then continue to Map of Days, and this is kind of where I started getting tired of reading these books. We are now in America. There's Peculiar World in Europe, which is where we had been in the past 3 books. We then move on to America, which is now a totally different place, and it is a lawless land, because that is what America is, and I guess that's what it will always be in every universe, even the peculiar one. But this book, in comparison to the rest of them, is significantly bigger. And I don't think it needed to be. Like I said, Riggs tends to ramble on about details of the universe because he really wants us to get invested in this world and know as much about it as possible. But not all of them, in my opinion, are necessary. There are parts of this book specifically that I was like, this could have been taken out and it could have been 100 pages less. Things just seemed to repeat themselves. I did, however, really enjoy seeing the peculiar kids from Miss Peregrine's home experience America. It was insanely funny for no reason whatsoever. There were parts of this that made this longer than it needed to be in my mind, and I hate having to force myself to get through a book to finish it. I, however, did have to do that, and did have to do that for the rest of the series, the second half of it, because to me, I just felt like we were going through the same motions that we did in the first 3 books. Again, just in a different country. I ended up giving this one a 3 out of 5, just because it felt too long, and I was getting really tired by the end of it. This book, however, I think is where we started getting into the more interesting parts of Peculiar America and the world, because you now are learning about a new character. It's nice because you're seeing a character basically go through what Jacob went through in the first 3 books herself, and now Jacob is the one to help her through that, which I thought was really cool to see his character be pushed in that direction of kind of like a mentor. I liked that he was the guiding light for her. I like that he was kind of this saving grace for her and her character, and I do like how they like bonded over that at the beginning. I, however, did not like how quickly their relationship escalated. To me, it just felt unnecessary. Maybe it's just because I don't understand men and how they write male characters, and I don't know how men's brains work, and I never will. But it just, to me, was like insane. I was like, we're going from 0 to 100 really fast, and I don't know how I feel about that. I also gave this book a 3 out of 5. I like how it ended. The ending of this book was super interesting to me. I was super hooked, and I was all for it. Finally reaching the last of the series. This one was, I think, shorter than Map of Days, but also still one of the longer. Map of Days and this one were 2 of the longer books out of this entire 6-book series. Kind of felt justified to me because, in a way, just because Map of Days, your introduction to the new world, and this one was long because you needed to wrap everything up. There was a lot that needed to be tied up with things that were being introduced in the 5th book and at the end of the 4th one. At the end of the 4th one is where the 5th one is where the big bad is like appearing again. Like, there were nods to it in the 4th one and at the beginning of the 5th one, but now at the end of the 5th one, like, stakes are really high and they need to defeat this guy again. Not gonna lie, I kind of checked out towards the end of this book. The ending I thought was very sweet, though. I did like the ending. I thought it wrapped up really well. I think he wrapped up this entire series perfectly in a way where, like, everyone kind of gets to be happy, and you know that this is the last one. Like, there will not be more books. I also gave this book 3 stars. Overall, I gave the series 3.5 stars out of 5. Like I said, it started off very strong in the beginning for me, and I really liked the first 3 books. I would probably reread the first 3 books. I, however, would not reread the last 3. I still found these books incredibly entertaining, and I loved a lot of the characters in this and how unique they were and how fun and personable they were. I do think that if it did end as a trilogy, it would probably have a higher rating overall for me. As I was getting through the Peculiar series, I was reading another Marauders fanfiction, which is actually 100,000 words longer than All the Young Dudes. Choices was also another beautifully written piece of literature that I have ever read. I strongly believe that, like, fic writers are the backbone of, like, writing and good authors. I have also never cried so hard reading anything in my life, and this is photographic evidence of that. I sobbed my eyes out. I'm never reading a canon compliant Jagulus fic ever again, because it broke my heart into a million pieces. I give this a 5 out of 5 for obvious reasons, and I don't think I will reread it just because emotionally I think it will shatter me again. The next book I read was If It Bleeds, which is a collection of 4 of Stephen King's short stories. I hadn't read Stephen King in a while, and I do enjoy his writing, but this was really a good way for me to get back into his writing. Mr. Harrigan's Phone was the first short story in this. I ended up giving it a 3.5 out of 5. It was so eerie. It just, like, had, like, all of the classic elements of what Stephen King is in my brain. It really loved the father-son relationship in this because a lot of the time the parental relationship with his characters are not very strong. So I really liked how he portrayed their father-son relationship. It just felt very wholesome to me, and I really enjoyed reading it. The second short story was Life of Chuck, which is actually being shot, I think, as a film right now. It made me cry. Stephen King has a tendency to sometimes write stories of just about, like, life and what being a human is like, and Life of Chuck is, like, following the story of a man's life, but in reverse. So it goes from his death to earlier in his life, and I loved it so much. I loved how he laid it out. I loved that it was in 3 acts. I love that it went backwards in time. I think it just really makes you think about life and reflection of, like, what your life is. There were multiple quotes during that short story that I really, really loved that I ended up marking them. One of them was, "The universe is large," he thought. "It contains multitudes. It also contains me, and in this moment I am wonderful, and I have the right to be wonderful." I read that and cried. Like, I was like, oh my god, you were right. And I think it was just something that I needed to hear in that moment of my life when I was reading this book last year, and it just made me feel great. It got a 4 out of 5 for me. I would reread that short story specifically, and I cannot wait to see what the movie is and how they take this story and adapt it into a film, because it is already broken up into 3 acts. Following that was the short story called If It Bleeds. The short actually follows a character from Mr. Mercedes that I have not read yet. It follows Holly, which is actually who his new book is about, which is Holly by Stephen King. I think Holly is probably my favorite female protagonist he has ever written. Because a lot of the time I don't like his female protagonist. I don't like how he writes women in a lot of his stories, and I don't like how they're seen in a lot of his stories. But Holly is a badass, and I love her, and I don't know if I want to be her or if I want to marry her, because I thought she was fucking awesome in the entirety of this short. I have not read Mr. Mercedes, so what is mentioned from Mr. Mercedes I didn't know about, and to me, he wrote it in a way to where you didn't have to read Mr. Mercedes or any of the books that are connected to that to understand this short story, which I really liked. I was on the edge of my seat the entire time I was reading it. I was fully invested. I could not stop reading it because it would just, like, kept drawing me in. I just wanted to keep knowing what was going to happen and if Holly was going to be okay. And it was really good. I really liked it. It was so action-packed. If It Bleeds, the short, got a 4.5 out of 5 for me. I really enjoyed it, and I'm very excited to read more with Holly's character because she is awesome. The last story in this collection was titled Rat. I did not like it that much. I thought it was a very weak way to end this collection of short stories. It felt more of, like, a self-reflection of Stephen King and his life, which was not necessarily my cup of tea. Not that I don't care about him as a person. That's not what I'm saying at all. I just, like, the way it was like so self-aware I of himself, I just couldn't handle it very much and take it seriously. But it was also very classic Stephen King with eerie elements, and the way he like writes the suspenseful parts of this short. I ended up giving it 2 out of 5, just because like it was interesting, but it just like to me felt like a very weak way to end the book. Even in a short, continues to expand on the Stephen King universe that exists in all of his books. I love that he has a universe, because like he's written so many books that it like makes sense, but it's just so funny to me every time. So I'm gonna stand on my soapbox for a second and say that everyone and their mother should read this book because it is beautiful. It's not very long. It's a very short book. I read this, I think, within 2 days because I couldn't handle it emotionally. Once you get to halfway through this book, I couldn't stop crying. And then I was like, there's more for me to read, and I don't want to read that right now. So I took a break in between, which is why it took me 2 days to read. But I think that this book is super important for everyone to get their hands on and learn this story. Nick Stone does a very good job of making these characters very real, very fast. You don't know super detailed things about their life and their past, but you do exist with them in their present. And that, I think, is why they felt so real to me. It's not just the characters that feel really real, and it's the reality of what these characters are facing in this book that I think is something that's super important, because unfortunately it's super prominent today, and it has been for years. What happens in this book is a fictitious depiction of what is the very, very real reality of what Black men have to face in this country, and it is sickening and upsetting as it still is going on. And I think that it's important for people to read this book and see this perspective because of how real it is. I think what made it even more real for me is that I did go to college in Atlanta, and I lived in Atlanta for a while, and Nick Stone was mentioning streets that I have driven on myself. The depiction of the events in this book is something that would never necessarily be my reality because I am a white woman in this country, and it just makes you think of what the reality for people who might not look like you is. And it was beautifully written, and I firmly believe everybody should read this book. I gave this 5 stars just because it was so well written. It's written in a way where anybody can read it and understand and realize how heavy this subject is and how important it is to know about and talk about and expose yourself to. I would read this again. I probably will read it again because I did get the second one. There are 2 books. I don't know if there are more after that, but I do know that there's one after this that has a connection to the main character and also one of the other characters that is mentioned in this that is called Dear Justice. I will continue to suggest this book to other people, and I think you should read it if you have not done so already. Continuing on my route of books about life, I then finally read Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. Like Rick, John Green is one of the very few male authors that I read and can leave me completely speechless after reading one of his books. I also want to know how he managed to tap into my subconscious and basically write a character that is me, and understand these complex feelings and emotions that I've been feeling for so long, and I wish I could read this book back when I was in middle school so I can understand that there are more people in the world that also experience this thing and I am not alone. I've always enjoyed his writing. I love how he writes characters, and I love how he writes them for teenagers, about teenagers, and it just, like, even as someone who's in their 20s, like, this struck a chord in me and made me realize more things about my life are super important, and that not everything that happens to you is something that will kill you, and you'll get through it and it'll be fine, and it's just one moment and it just keeps going. It was a nice nod to nostalgia for me because I haven't read a John Green book in a really long time. I think the last time I read it was back in middle school or high school was the last time I read John Green. I ended up originally giving this 5 stars just because of how much I related to the main character and her feelings of anxiety and panic attacks and things like that. I bumped it down to a 4 because while I enjoyed this book while I was reading it, I don't know if I will read it again, which is kind of like the main factor for me for books that receive a 5-star rating. It's more of like, will I read it again? And I don't think I will read this again. While I did enjoy it, a lot and I really liked it, I don't think it's something that I feel the need to read for a second time. I stayed on like this route of like coming of age books about life and just being people, and that were very character driven. Next one that I read was Everything I Never Told You. I don't know how this book came into my possession. I don't remember purchasing it. I don't remember hearing anything about it. I don't even remember reading the summary of it, but somehow this book ended up in my room. I also don't know why it's so beat up and looks like it had been waterlogged. It's like super bendy and crunchy, and as you can see, the pages are literally like wavy. I don't know where this book came from or how I got it, but I enjoyed reading. This is the first book I've ever read by this author, and I really enjoy her writing. I love how she writes. It's similar to how I really liked Madeline Miller. She just kind of like describes things in such a beautiful way, and I felt like I was with the characters. The characters felt so three-dimensional and so like they felt so real and like real people that I had to continuously remind myself that this book is to be set in the 1970s, because if you took these characters and took them out of the era that in which this book is taking place and put them in any other time period, even in modern age, I think it still would have been relevant. And I think that that's what makes a good story, is it's something that can like exceed time in which it is taking place and when it was written. This had such an in-depth look on life and family and what it is to be a family after you lose someone close to you, and navigating your relationships with each other and with other people, and just what grief is and going through it, and I just thought it was super beautiful. I also found it very interesting how she wrote in the third person, but also in the third person from the perspective of 5 different characters, but you're able to follow what is going on and being in these characters' heads and seeing the world from their perspective, and how all of that and all of their point of views are connected to each other. It was so well written, and usually that's not something that I think that I would be able to follow and understand, but I did, and the way that she wrote it was so successful, in my opinion. I ended up giving this a 4.5. It made me cry at the end, like a lot, and I may read this again, but I am really excited to read more of her work to see if she does keep the style, and how, because I just really enjoyed how she wrote these characters. Now we are entering the point of my reading journey for 2023 where I lifted the book ban off of myself and bought books and was reading books that I didn't already own. The next book that I read was Six of Crows. The only reason I disregarded my book ban was because one of my best friends recommended this book to me, and she is not the type of person who reads a lot of books. So I knew if that she was recommending a book for me to read, I had to read it, and so I moved this up on my TBR. It had been sitting on my TBR and my to purchase list for quite some time, and I did know that these are characters that exist in Shadow and Bone as well, which I still haven't seen. But I wanted to read it because a lot of people talked very highly of this duology specifically. I'm very glad I did move this up and I did buy a copy of it and lifted the book ban off of me, because holy shit, this book was such a wild ride. I'm so mad that Shadow and Bone got canceled and that we will not be getting the adaptation of this duology, because I think it totally deserves it. These characters are so dynamic and interesting, and they're all unique in their own way, and the way that they are connected to each other, and this found family trope makes me want to rip my hair out and cry and kick and scream and throw up, because I love them so much. This got 5 stars for me. I really loved it. Love the multiple point of views, and I love Inej and Nina more than life itself. I also annotated for the first time in a while and like had like a color code and like actual tabs. I don't usually do that, but this series like brought it out in me for whatever reason. I did the same thing for Crooked Kingdom, which was the next book that I read because I wanted to finish the duology. In both this book and the first book, but especially this one, I have never wanted to take a character by their shoulders and shake them so aggressively that they would get some sense knocked into them, like I wanted to do it to Icebreaker. Oh my god. I appreciate how she wrote all these characters, and I loved seeing their individual journeys in this, and I really like that she included Wyland's point of view in this, because he deserves a hug. Can someone hug Wylan, please? I love him so much. I really liked how in both of these books she takes a situation that everyone in this cast of characters is experiencing, but you see their perspective and their thoughts on it, and at different points in which the mission is happening. It was longer than Six of Crows, and the stakes in this book were significantly higher because they had to be, and I thought she did a very good job of navigating those stakes and making me be on edge the entire time. The found family, the unfolding puzzle, the unrequited love, the enemies to lovers, the friends to lovers, the tropes that exist in these books, and the humor and the banter between these characters is something that I absolutely loved, and I cannot for the life of me get over. Also, got a 5 out of 5. The two of these books, 5 out of 5 for me. I would reread these. I probably will reread them. I love them so much. I really enjoyed the series, and I cannot wait to watch Shadow and Bone finally, because Ben Barnes. Speaking of Ben Barnes, whoa. Just woke up my cat. Speaking of Ben Barnes, I then decided to read The Picture of Dorian Gray. Wanting to read more classics, and I do know a little bit of Oscar Wilde's writing from a playwright perspective rather than like his novel perspective. I am familiar with the story of Dorian Gray. Haven't seen the movie, but it's a classic and so many people know this story, and so I did want to finally read it, and I was very excited to read it. I did, however, listen to most of it because the audiobook was narrated by Ben Barnes, and it's Ben Barnes. Can you tell? I have had a crush on Ben Barnes since I saw Narnia and was in love with Prince Caspian. This book made me realize that men suck. Lord Henry sucks. Dorian Gray sucks. Pretty much every man in this book sucks. I hate men. Men are awful. And that is kind of the thought process that I had through this entire book. I thought the ending was super interesting. It was very mysterious and very suspenseful for a lot of this book. Also, the chapter where Dorian Gray is just talking about him being a material girl, I thought was so funny. As boring as it was, I thought it was fucking hilarious. He was like, I'm now a crystal girly, and I also collect art. And I was like, slay. Because, as you should. 3.5 out of 5 for me. I understand why this is a classic, because there is so much of this book that you can pick apart, and I know people have picked apart, and I understand why it's a classic and why it is basically timeless, because it is an interesting read, and it is a very interesting look on life and humanity and why people are the way that they are, and also why men suck. And I'm very excited to finally watch the movie after reading this, because Ben Barnes. I really love Ben Barnes, if you can tell. Now we are getting into the last book that I read in 2023, and unfortunately, I hate that it was the last book that I read of 2023, and that was Icebreaker. The reason why this was the last book that I read in 2023 is because I refused to continue reading this into the new year. I did not want to bring this in with me into 2024. I wanted to DNF this book so bad, but I have the toxic trait of a person who refuses to DNF a book when I've started it because I've already put time and effort into it, but also I'm nosy and I want to know how it ends. And I don't want to flip to the end of a book and then be confused as to why it ended in that way. So I'm just going to finish it, because I'm going to force myself to finish this book, and to which I did for this one, and I wish I didn't. This book felt to me the same way as when I was 12 and on Wattpad and reading After, when it was the most popular Harry Styles fanfiction on the app. Should I have read that at 12 years old? No, but that's besides the point. Editor Brooke here. Hi. I look sick right now. I'm so sorry. I think I am getting sick. So I learned that this story was actually published on Wattpad before it was published in the form of a book, which to me makes a lot of sense as to why it was written the way that it was. There's a specific audience on Wattpad when it comes to romance. This hits all the boxes for that, and now a lot of things are making sense, and I'm fully understanding why this book was written the way that it was. That was all the information I wanted to give. Back to the video. The fact that this book is 420 something pages long, and the conflict that is described on the back of this book does not happen until halfway through, made me want to scream. This gave me a false idea of what this book actually was. It did not go in the way that I was expecting it to by reading the back of this book. It sounded very similar to a movie from like the 80s or 90s that came out. I cannot remember the name of it. That's what I thought this was going to be. I thought this was kind of going to be like an enemies to lovers situation, and then it was not. It was not that at all. I also just felt like there was like no reason for the bad blood between them at the beginning to be there in the first place. It just didn't feel justified. It didn't feel like there was enough weight. They didn't know each other. I don't know why she was so mad at him and held a grudge at him for so long, because if like a man told me something that wasn't true, but I didn't know him that well, I genuinely wouldn't care. But I guess that makes me different from Anastasia in so many ways. I don't read romance books for the reason I felt the way I did when I was reading this book. I didn't really necessarily enjoy it. And I don't want to bash the author or anyone who enjoys this. If you do, that's totally your opinion, and I totally respect you. It's just not my cup of tea, and it's not something that I enjoyed while reading. I'm a girl through and through. So if you like this book, that is totally okay. I support you and your opinions, but I also have my opinions, and you should respect me for that as well. I didn't like any of the characters in this book whatsoever. None of them had redeeming qualities for me. I found them all very annoying. I found them all pretty flat. I also found them not to be realistic at all. I think this is her first book that Hannah Grace has ever written, and you can kind of tell just because of how disconnected parts of the story felt. Like every chapter felt like a different chunk of something, but like it was very loosely connected to each other. A lot of time passes in this book, and it didn't feel like it needed to. It also felt like the characters, even though that there had been a good chunk of time that had passed, they were the exact same as they were like a few weeks before, and I didn't necessarily appreciate it. The details that she dropped in this book just felt like she was trying to lead into those other stories and making you want to care about those minor characters. I just didn't. I gave this book a 1 because it just like was not my cup of tea at all. I didn't really like it that much, and I didn't want to give it nothing because that just doesn't feel fair. There were never moments when I was like, I love these characters, I care about them. I didn't really care about the characters and the things that were happening. I just wanted to see how the plot progressed and what happened. It just felt like one of those books that just didn't live up to the hype for me. That's just a personal thing, but I don't think I'm going to read any more of her writing, just because I didn't really like it that much, and it just wasn't for me. But if it is one of your favorite books, that's totally fine. I respect your opinion, and you should also respect mine, because that's just me. This is just me. This is just my opinion, and I'm one person. But if this is one of your favorite books, that's totally cool. That is everything I read in 2023. I am incredibly proud of myself that I read as many books as I did. Like I said, I set my goal at 15 books for the year, and to me that felt extremely daunting and kind of impossible. And then I did 10 more than that, reading 25 books total, and most of them being read within 6 months is fairly impressive for myself. If you don't count the 2 fics, it's still 23 books, which is still a lot more than what my original goal was. I want to make a separate video talking about my goals for this year, because I do have a few more. My reading count is definitely going to be higher because I have proven to myself that I am capable of doing that. Also really excited to be making content within this realm, talking about books that I've read and films and stuff. If you decide to stick around with me, thank you. And if you got this far into the video, also thank you. You are awesome, and I greatly appreciate it. You subscribe, hit like, all that fun stuff. You know the drill with YouTube. I also have a bunch of my socials linked down below. I'm mainly going to be active on TikTok and Twitter. That's mainly where you can find me, but I'm also planning on resuming streaming on Twitch just for fun, because I miss playing Stardew on stream and just having a good time. So if you want to follow me on there, you can do so. Everything is linked down below. But yeah, I will see you guys in the next video, whenever that may be, hopefully soon. Remember, you are loved, especially by me, and do something nice for yourself today. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.